Testing, testing. We're ready.
Okay. Welcome to the regular meeting of the San Rafael City Council. Today is Monday, September 21st, 2020. I'm going to ask the city attorney if there was any reportable action taken in closed session both today, this evening, as well as September 14th.
Thank you. Good evening, Vice Mayor Colin, members of the council, members of the community watching tonight. There was no reportable action taken at either the meeting on the 14th or at tonight's closed session.
Thank you. I will request the city clerk to call the roll call and address how the public comment will be taken this evening.
Thank you. Councilmember Bushy.
Present.
Vice Mayor Colin.
Here.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Present.
Councilmember McCullough.
Here.
Mayor Phillips is absent for this evening, and Vice Mayor Colin will be Mayor Pro Tem Colin. This meeting is being streamed live to YouTube, where viewers can provide comments in the live chat, or they're welcome to attend by telephone by calling 669-900-9128, and the meeting ID will be 850-6400-3042 #. If you're participating over the telephone and you wish to provide public comments, please press *9 when Mayor Pro Tem Colin opens the public comment period. When it's your time to speak, you'll hear a notification that the host is inviting you to speak, in which time you'll need to press *6 to unmute yourself. Once you hear the notification that you've been unmuted, you'll have 2 minutes to provide your comments. If you're submitting comments on YouTube to be read aloud, please write public comments in caps. Introduce yourself and submit your comments. And note that there is a character limit on YouTube, so please submit your comments in groupings. Additionally, if you're planning to speak to the City Council on matters not on this evening's agenda, please submit your comments as soon as possible, because that will be coming up here soon. And if you submitted comments prior to the meeting by email or letter, they've been forwarded to the City Council and published to the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, City Clerk. Okay, Jim Schutz, I'm calling for the City Manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. I do have a couple updates and announcements, and then I'm going to turn it over to the City Attorney to make some remarks under this item as well. At their last meeting, the San Rafael City Schools Board voted to end the school resource officer assignments. For many years, the San Rafael Police Department filled a special assignment of a school resource officer with one police officer, and then recently a second was added due to the school district getting a grant for an anti-vaping, anti-tobacco program. And when on special assignment, most of the work was with the schools, but not all of it, because of summer breaks and holidays and times that the department would need the officer for other limited responsibilities. I just wanted to bring up this action tonight by the San Rafael City School Board, just to kind of mention kind of some next steps for our community if you're interested in this particular topic. So again, one of the positions was funded by the city and the other was funded through a grant. With the school board's recent action, the special assignment will end, and the police officers will end that portion of their duties. It also means we won't need to fill essential vacancies in the police department. I did have a conversation with the San Rafael City Schools superintendent, and he suggested working together in the coming months to analyze if there is some other approach for a partnership that would make sense both for the schools and the city, that would likely not involve police officers, but could involve other ways to work together. It does fit in well with the track that the city has already been on as we start looking at our calls for service, our emergency 911 calls, and analyzing to see if there are alternative ways to respond, such as with a mental health professional or a small team of professionals, rather than always responding with a police officer. Vice Mayor Colin and Councilmember Gamblin are leading this work. As we go through that process, it'll be great to work with the school district and also community organizations and other stakeholders to come up with the best possible approach. Also, the County of Marin would make a natural partner as they run mobile crisis teams, and some of the types of calls that we've preliminarily identified as possible that could go to a different type of response could be those sort of calls that a mobile crisis team might respond to. And also the county's the level of government that oversees health and human services. So it seems like that would be a good potential partner for us to be speaking with. And while it may sound easy just to kind of shift this responsibility, there are a lot of things to figure out, like what's the best type of response to what type of calls, to emergency calls. Where does that response come from? How does it get funded? As the council knows, we had a $9 million budget deficit this year that we are closed a large portion of, but still have more to close. So funding is definitely an issue during the pandemic and after. And how do we keep people safe? And if the nature of an emergency call starts changing as it develops, how do we measure results? All of those sorts of things are things that we're going to want to really study and know before making changes in this area. So in a recent newspaper article on this topic, the superintendent was quoted as saying district officials plan to work with the school community and the police department in the spring to develop next steps. And so I just wanted to make a quick note on timing. We're a little over a month away from the November elections, and that election has all sorts of different things on the ballot. But as it comes to the San Rafael City Council, it could lead to an ultimate change in between 1 and 3 city council seats, depending on the outcome of that election. As the council knows, and our community has already heard, the police chief has announced her retirement at the end of the year. And also the San Rafael City School Board will see changes, with some board members leaving and others running for the seats. So the idea of having these conversations in the spring, or at least as early as right after the first of the new year, makes sense practically. And it also aligns well with the work we're already doing when we're looking at our emergency calls for service and looking at alternative ways of dealing with those. So it's a lot to work out, but I know the council's been absolutely committed to going through this process and looking at our service delivery to make it as successful as possible. I just wanted to give a quick COVID-19 update. The overall COVID positive numbers continue to trend downward in Marin. And as everyone knows by now, we moved from tier 1, the purple tier, into tier 2, the red tier, as of Tuesday of last week, which caused a number of businesses to be able to open at larger capacities. And we need to remain in the tier 2 for at least 2 consecutive weeks, and then before schools could reopen. So that could be as early as September 29th, but all of the different school districts are handling this, working with Marin County Office of Education and the County Health Department to make determinations on a district by district basis. So that the best place to tune in for information on when schools would open or what grades or that sort of thing would be through Marin County Office of Education and the particular school district that students are in. A couple other notes kind of related to COVID-19 and the response. There's a collaborative that's called Keep Marin Working that's working on an economic recovery plan and the huge impact of coronavirus on our business community and employees. That's being led by Marin Economic Forum and the Marin Chambers of Commerce, and the cities and towns in Marin and the county are also involved in that. So we'll have more to report once that moves a little bit further along in the process. And also in the category of policy groups that are working to address the short, medium, long-term impacts of the pandemic, Vice Mayor Colin and city staff, along with our counterparts at the County of Marin, are working with Canal Alliance, Legal Aid of Marin, and Community Action Marin, looking at the Canal neighborhood and the many issues as a COVID response related to general topics like housing, health, and business support. And that group's going to be meeting weekly. So we expect a lot more to come from that group as well. This past weekend was the first weekend in September that we did not open up our San Rafael Community Center as either a cooling center or a clean air center. So that's good. We have a streak of 1 weekend so far in September that wasn't necessary. So that's positive. And as you know, in the area of landlord and renter assistance, the Board of Supervisors recently approved some funding that the cities and towns in Marin contributed to that would go towards both Legal Aid of Marin for working with tenants and landlords, and also county mediation services, because we know that it's a difficult time with eviction ordinances ending and with AB 3088. So there's additional funding going in to support renter and landlord relationships and outcomes. And also the Board of Supervisors has on their agenda at their board meeting tomorrow a general update on eviction bans and other tenant protections. So more to come on that topic. So that concludes my remarks, and I'm going to turn it over to the city attorney now for some additional remarks.
Thank you, Jim. Good evening again. Rob Epstein, city attorney. I am going to offer some remarks on an incident that occurred last month. It was an incident involving our police department. And I'm talking about it tonight because we are expecting an IJ article to come out shortly about the incident. And we thought it was important to bring it to the attention of the community tonight. So I'm going to do my best to get it right, but I would encourage the council when I'm through, if you have any questions, if I haven't made something clear, please do not hesitate to ask me. So this incident was a traffic stop, and it occurred due to a report that 911 received of an armed carjacking. And so the incident ultimately involved a person who was pulled over, and this occurred on Highway 101, and the person was black. And it's important to note right at the outset that when this individual was pulled over, none of our officers were aware of the person's ethnicity, nor their gender, age, or otherwise. As I said, the officers were responding to a 911 call that had been made just a few minutes before. And that call raised a reasonable suspicion that the vehicle had been stolen by someone who was reported as carrying a firearm. So when this occurs, it's what the police call a high-risk traffic stop. The single officer who spotted the vehicle and thought that he had a match to the vehicle that had been described over the dispatch. There was no license plate that they had. They were just going by a vehicle description. That officer had to wait for backup because believing that the person in the vehicle could be armed, they required more units to respond. And so that's why this ultimately happened on the freeway. And when the stop occurred, the person was required to exit their vehicle. They had to walk backwards toward the police officers. And ultimately, they were briefly handcuffed. And then when the matter was sorted out, when our police officers were made clear that they had the wrong vehicle, this person, after having been briefly detained, was released after the officers apologized for what had occurred. I know that Chief Bishop, after she had an opportunity to hear about this incident and review it, reached out to the individual who was involved to express her apology that this had happened, and that this person told the chief that the person had been traumatized by the incident. The city has now received a claim associated with this incident, and typically we do not comment on pending claims, but I do want to make a couple of additional remarks. There is video, body cam video of the incident, and the city's prepared to release that and will be doing so promptly, but wishes certainly to maintain the privacy of the individual involved. And this is something that is very painful for the person to whom it happened. And as I've thought about it, I would say that I would only imagine what it must have felt like to be the person who was incorrectly pulled over, with officers who believed that the person was armed, with officers who were indeed pointing their firearms at the person. But I can tell you that because the individual to whom this happened was Black, I can't even imagine how terrifying that must have been for that individual. So it's an upsetting incident, and it's one that fills us with sorrow at City Hall and at the police department that it occurred. It was brief, but in that brief period of time, there was real trauma that resulted for this individual. There is something that I'm pleased to report after telling this news, though, that has been sparked at City Hall as a result of the conversations around this incident and what could we do about it. The thing that must be made clear is that the chief has reviewed the incident. I have reviewed the incident. Our outside counsel has reviewed the incident. And with regard to the technicalities, the police procedures and practices, everything that they did was done correctly. And again, it could not have been a case of racial profiling because the officers did not know the ethnicity of the person when they pulled the person over until after the person got out of the car. But recognizing in these fraught times how intense and traumatic that experience must have been, we've now reached out to this individual with something new that we've never tried before. And it's not something that local government's really familiar with, but we've had the good fortune recently of having contact with Lorenzo, who helped us with our Eight Can't Wait committee. And Lorenzo introduced us to another local expert, Rochelle Edwards, who is an expert in what's called restorative justice. We had a chance to meet with her, talk about what she might be able to help us bring to this situation. And after that conversation, the city invited this individual to engage with the police officers who were involved to have a session of conversation and restorative justice, with the goals being an effort to gain mutual understanding, to hear one another about what they experienced in the incident, and hopefully for an experience for everyone concerned of healing. So we don't have an answer yet whether this individual is willing to participate in that process, but I, for one, am very pleased that this is something that the city has now initiated and is hoping to do. So I'm glad, as I said, to take any questions that the council might have at this time.
Are there any questions from the council?
Not so much a question, but a suggestion that Rob provide some of the timeline. You used terms like a short period of time. Could you let everyone know the number of minutes involved in this event?
Thank you, Councilmember Bushy. It's a good question. I believe the entire event lasted less than 10 minutes, or approximately 10 minutes. So it was relatively brief, but I'm sure that it felt like an eternity for the person who was involved. And so it took time for the person to get back to the police vehicle. And then by the time that happened, there was some information that the officers had that suggested that they had the wrong vehicle. But it took a little bit of time to sort that out. And they wanted to make sure that everybody was safe who was involved, including this individual. And so once they were able to assure that and also confirm that they had the wrong vehicle, as I said, this person was released after being briefly detained and then assisted in returning to the freeway.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah. Councilmember McCullough.
Yeah, I just wanted to very briefly share. I'm going to speak on my own behalf, but I suspect I speak for everyone on the council. My sense of dismay that this occurred, and I'm simply reiterating what you said, Rob. A real deep dismay that this kind of incident, no matter how inadvertent, occurred within our jurisdiction. And I'm truly hopeful that this effort at restorative justice will go a long way towards helping both sides find greater understanding and trust. But thank you for that explanation.
Thank you, Councilmember McCullough.
Thank you. Councilmember Gablin.
Yeah, I too would like to thank the city attorney for this presentation. It's really tough on all of us to hear this at any time, but even more now. And I'm really glad that we're taking this step and trying this process with the restorative justice. And I truly hope that the participants will agree to this and we can learn from this, because it's a shame that it happened, for sure. And we can say we see all sides, but we really can't, because we haven't been in that position. But for the opportunity for those sides to get together and talk and figure out, how this works and what we can do better, I think will be great. And I really hope it takes place. And I appreciate what the city has done, because we do need to address this. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just conclude by saying I also appreciate the update, that the fact that you've been so forthright in describing this incident to our community shows a seriousness with which we reflect upon it. And I share the same kind of it just made me heartsick, the whole situation and hearing about it. But also, like my colleagues have said, I'm hopeful for the restorative justice practice. I don't know of any other jurisdictions that have looked to use this as a tool. And hopefully we'll bring some healing, and we won't ever have to have this conversation and this incident occur again. So with that, unless there's anything else, City Attorney?
No, thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so with that, we're going to move on to the time for open public expression. So are there any comments from the public on a topic that is not on tonight's agenda? The city clerk will describe how you can participate.
Thank you. If you are participating by telephone and you wish to provide public comments, please press *9. And when it is your turn to speak, you'll be notified that the host is inviting you to participate. You will need to press *6 in order to unmute yourself. And if you're participating on YouTube, please submit your comments now, and note that when submitting the comments, you do need to write public comment prior to your message if you would like it to be read into the record. I see no comments currently, but I'm going to give it about 15 seconds to get some people some time to type them on in.
Okay.
I'm seeing no public comments.
Okay, thank you, City Clerk. So we'll move to the consent calendar. Are there any items that the council would like to hold for comment? If not, then we will open public comment and receive a vote. Are there any items that would request to be held? Okay, seeing none, are there any comments from the public that would like to comment on any item on the consent calendar?
Once again, if you are calling in and you'd like to provide public comment, please press *9. And if you're participating on YouTube, please submit your comments now and write public comments in advance. And also, this is just for items on the consent calendar. And I'll give another 15 seconds. I'm not seeing any right now.
Okay.
I'm seeing no comments on the consent calendar.
Okay. So is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
City Clerk, can you conduct a roll call? Did you get you got who that was on each of them?
I did. Thank you.
Right.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Councilmember McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Colin.
Aye, that motion carries 4-0. Okay, so moving on to the first agenda item on measures to facilitate housing development and streamline approvals. I think there's a staff report from from Ethan Guy. I'll hand it over to you.
My screen real quick.
And Paul, okay.
And you also have Alicia Judici on as well.
Okay.
Can we see my
Thank
screen?
you. Yes, we can.
Great. So I promise this presentation will be significantly shorter than the last one, as it's just a follow-up summary of the item that we had at the last meeting. At that last meeting, council asked us to return with just a summary so that they could review those actions before we move forward. So on September 8th, we brought up 4 potential policies that were aimed at streamlining housing development. The first was an inclusionary housing requirement change. The second was a density bonus change. The third was formalizing the design review subcommittee. And then the final was some small permit process changes. So at that meeting, of those 4 policies, this is the summary direction that staff wrote down. And all that we want to do today is just confirm that this is still the direction. And then the action there will be to move forward with those recommendations, and staff will go along and start working on that. So as it relates to the inclusionary housing requirement, the direction that we wrote down is that staff should proceed with the 10% below market rate equivalent that was listed as scenario 3 in that staff report, as well as allowing buyouts for projects that have received planning approval but have not yet pulled building permits. The next step on that policy would be to proceed to the Planning Commission and then the City Council for public hearings to review the necessary municipal code amendments. As it relates to the density bonus policy, the direction that we received was to proceed with simplifying the density bonus ordinance itself so that it aligns with state regulations. Again, that would proceed to a Planning Commission and then the City Council for public hearings for the SRMC amendments. The third policy would be to formalize the design review subcommittee. This one was a little bit more in depth, where the first piece was that we wrote down to pilot a less formal design review advisory committee called the DRAC. And then we would have also include public noticing procedures in measures similar to the zoning administrator meeting format. And then finally, also move forward with a planning commission first. So the planning commission would hear projects first, and then the design review subcommittee would hear those projects second. For this to happen, we would proceed with preparing a policy resolution for city council action, because this would be a pilot and it wouldn't be a full-on change. And then the final piece was permitting process changes for the hillside exceptions, appeals process, height bonus, and small lots. So the direction we wrote down was to proceed with ordinance amendments as presented. For the hillside exception, just to note and clarify that this would change it to a planning commission action, which would be consistent with similar planning permit applications. And like the inclusionary and the density piece, this would proceed with planning commission and then city council public hearings on the SRMC amendment as the next step. And I do just want to flag that tonight there would be no policy changes implemented. This is just to provide staff direction. All of these items would still have to come back before that they would be able to be approved. So the final slide. There's 3 options. First is to accept the report and direct staff to present recommended in the report. That is the staff recommendation. You could also direct staff to return with more information, and then final, take no action. And before I pass on to City Council, Alicia did want to make a few comments on some of the items as well.
Thank you, Ethan. I just wanted to address one of the comment letters that we received from one of the design review board members that provided some feedback and recommendations on the structure of the design review advisory committee, but really more importantly expressed concerns about not being involved in the process of, changing the structure of the DRB. And I just wanted to say, and I think, all of us that have been involved in the process, but all of us that deal with the development review process in general, have a lot of respect for our design review board members and really find them to be very valuable. And so leaving them out, I mean, we could have done better, but we will. We most definitely could have included them, but I wanted to say that this has been, we started this process about a year or two ago. It more recently began to evolve, and we've been working remotely, and in that process, we inadvertently left the DRB conversation out. But we have some time. We're now going to be, if the city council directs us, we will be looking at revising the structure, and we'll be contacting the DRB board members and including them in the conversation and receiving feedback from them before we bring this back to your council with a recommendation. So I did want to mention that. That's it.
Thank you. And to your point, this is a process that the council started on, I think, over a year ago. And before tonight is the report as we continue to work through this and figure out ways to support housing, the right kind of housing development in our community. So with that, are there questions from the council members? Let's see. Yeah, Councilmember Gamblin.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. Thanks, Allie, for the update. And as we all know, we spent a lot of time on this last. I know we received some inquiries. I think Bill Carney sent something over from Sustainable Santa Fe wanting to call out the inclusionary ratio instead of going down to 10, but to 15. I would assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that because we're not taking any action today other than giving direction, that there will be more deliberative process going on, and that we can ask staff to inquire about the 15% and run some more numbers so that we can have that information and address Mr. Carney's concerns and questions about that going forward. I mean, we're not locked in, even though we're saying to you today in that number one, let's go forward and look at this 10%. We can actually ask, during the process, what does 15% look like more, or get more in depth than what we did last time? Is that correct?
That is correct. The one thing I would want to note, though, is the next step would be developing the ordinance itself and then going to the Planning Commission. So part of how we wanted to try to structure this was to make sure that we're really sure as to kind of what we want to do moving into that next step. So you're absolutely right. We can do that if that's the council direction. But it may delay that process a little bit. So if there are changes in the Planning Commission and the City Council and all that.
And I'm not saying that we do change that direction for you right now, but I know that there's a process that will go through, and there will be time for public comment at the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission will also provide input. So I guess the point, and I probably didn't say it, is that this will be a process from here. This is a starting point. Planning Commission is going to get it. They're going to be able to receive public comment. They're going to be able to make suggestions and recommendations to the city. It's going to come back to us in the form of an ordinance where we will be able to receive public comment and then address back to you as well. So again, just reiterating that nothing's taking place today that is going to change where we are right now. Absolutely. And that goes throughout on all of the pieces that we have. And I do want to thank Allie for bringing up the piece of including our design review professionals. We all received that email today. And I think I realize that it's an oversight, and I appreciate the fact that we were going to go back and engage with them on it, because I'm not a design professional. Nobody on the council is a design professional, and we rely so much on those folks. We spent a whole lot of time in the council putting forth good design measures for downtown and for the whole city, and had a great report on that too. It feels bad not to include these folks that are giving their time to the city with their expertise. I know it can be a laborious process for some applicants to go through this, but I think in the end result, it was pointed out in the email that a lot of our applicants appreciate the resource that the design review provides to them, and have actually adjusted their plans and their projects for the better because of the experience they had with the design review. So thank you, Allie, for making that point, and I have nothing further.
Thank you. Any other council member? No. Ethan, I just have one question. It was also, I think, from the Sustainable San Rafael, and it was about the in lieu buyout. And if you could just speak to that, because we're talking about percentages, right? So if we end up having you pursue the 10% inclusionary, how come there wouldn't be a similar number for the in lieu buyout?
So the main reason behind that is how the 10% is structured right now is that there would be a baseline at 5%. And then the secondary requirement is how we're moving forward, calling it, would have to meet a 5% equivalent. So right now, looking at just a financial breakdown, we set that at a 5% in lieu, as well as a 5% on-site option. Now, if you increase that in lieu fee to 10% or 15%, you change the incentive structure of those requirements. So it is possible, but what that would do is it would no longer be equivalent across all the separate buckets. That would kind of mess up a little bit the equivalency structure. It would incentivize on-site development. But part of what we were trying to move forward with and trying to discuss in the staff report last time was the effectiveness of those in lieu fee dollars, is that by disincentivizing the in lieu fee, you would be disincentivizing the most effective portion of that policy.
Thank you. And yes, we did appreciate 2 weeks ago you had, I think the presentation was almost an hour. So for those just watching tonight, you got the abbreviated version, but you can go watch that. It is on the city website. And to Councilmember Gamlin's point, this is a beginning of a longer conversation. So there is still time, plenty of time for input. Speaking of which, if there's no other questions, I will open this up for public comment. The city clerk, could you speak to how people can comment?
Yeah, thank you. If you're participating by telephone and you wish to speak, please press *9 now. And it's when it's your turn to speak, you'll be notified that the host is inviting you to participate. And you will need to press *6. Once you unmute yourself, you're welcome to provide 2 minutes of comments. And if you're participating on YouTube, please start submitting your comments now. And please make sure you write public comment in advance and also introduce yourself to the council. We do have some hands raised, so let me get my timer ready.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. This is Bill Carney with Sustainable San Rafael. I appreciate Councilmember Gamlin's close read of our letter and comments following up on that letter. I do think going forward that it would be very useful for the public and the council to have something mentioned a little further down in our letter, which is the metrics that have led us to this point. By which I mean the performance of housing production and affordable housing production in particular over, say, the last 10 years, and factoring in the various economic conditions, et cetera, that may have influenced that production. And maybe even more important, using that as a basis to project forward what are the metrics that the city will use to determine whether the revised inclusionary requirements are in fact producing the hoped for results of more housing and more affordable housing in particular. So I think having those metrics really clear so everybody can see that is necessary both for the decision you're making, and since you are making a decision, whichever scenario you ultimately choose to change the current practice, then being able to judge how those changes play out. So I think those are the main things I wanted to say. The final thing is that I think that there's a big shift going on to emphasize in lieu payment more. That's a big part of what you're considering. And, that seems like a good idea. It will produce a stream of revenue that can be used to leverage other resources to build more affordable housing. But we would really emphasize the build more affordable housing part, not the buying up existing units or anything like that. So that we're clear again that we're going to continue to expand the productivity of new housing units in the city, and therefore a more integrated, economically integrated city going forward. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Bill.
Hi, this is Victoria DeWitt. I would like to comment on the part of the streamlining process that has to do with technical reports required for a given project. As an example, I submitted a letter about a project in our neighborhood at 38 Upper Fremont Drive that was approved at a recent Planning Commission hearing. The proposal was for a steeply sloped lot that we felt should have had a geotechnical investigation report submitted prior to the review and approval of this project, which required fairly extensive excavation. The staff report stated that, where possible, staff has attempted to reduce or eliminate the need for site-specific technical reports, which would reduce applicant costs and processing time. I believe a geotechnical investigation report was required for this project due to a hazardous slope stability rating, but in this instance, it was not required prior to approval. My question to you is, do you think there needs to be better clarification as to what technical reports can be reduced or eliminated and what reports are still required? I'm concerned that all technical reports may be subject to the same level of discretion by planning staff, or that the interpretation of current standards become broader than intended. How can you assure fairness and consistency among projects, especially if different planners interpret requirements differently? Does this open up the possibility of undue influence by a developer or undue pressure on staff? In addition, I'd like to comment on another letter that was submitted this afternoon, which I hope you've had a chance to read. I'm glad to see the opportunity for public participation in the design review process again. Thank you for allowing that to continue. I also think it's important to update the criteria for hillside exceptions to more clearly state and standardize how exceptions should be reviewed, particularly if you decide to downgrade the decision to the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. And I know that Council received both of your letters.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think someone has been unmuted, someone on the phone, ending in 8552. I think you're ready to go.
You can go ahead and press *6. It'll unmute your phone. Okay, so just in case they haven't gotten the notification yet, we'll try them again in a second. We do have some public comments from YouTube.
Thank you.
This is from Chris Hart. My name is Chris Hart. I'm a lifelong resident of Santa Fe. As someone involved in real estate throughout the country, I encourage the council to accept the staff recommendations. Each of these measures will result in positive outcomes for the community. 15% inclusionary is too small to have an impact in improving the supply-demand imbalance. Ethan's report summary, while short, emoji winky face, is welcomed. The city will be beautified as a result of accepting the staff's recommendation. We have great professionals here. Last comment, not 25 comments tonight. The only metric that is worthwhile is units built, not approved. Supply side needs help, not the demand side. Amy Lykover. I am against the elimination of DRB. Projects improve significantly with residents' input and expertise. Hillside guidance keeps Center Fells Hill safe and beautiful. My name is Joanne Webster, President and CEO of the Chamber. We support staff's recommendation. Give me 1 second, it looks like comments might be getting added. We support staff's recommendation. It will spur development of much needed housing. In scenario 3, we will get the most feasibility for both moderate, low, and very low, and units will actually be built. The Chamber is very supportive of affordable housing. However, the current plan is not working, and our intel is informing us that 15% will not be feasible. We suggest scenario 3 for a pilot. And then there's some more that are coming in over YouTube. So while those are coming in, I'm going to try again on our caller.
Okay, thank you.
If you receive a notification to speak, you'll just press *6 and you'll be able to speak.
Fantastic. Hello?
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Great. Hi, my name is Brad Sears. I'm a general contractor apartment owner, real estate investor, and I live on Fifth Avenue. And I would financially benefit by this measure. But in my 2 brief minutes, I'd like to point out to the council towards some reading and reference material. First, the online news source for Marin, the Marin Post, edited by Mr. Bob Silvestri, president of Community Venture Partners, a nonprofit that furthers real affordable housing. The contributors to this blog provide a counterbalance to arguments for this measure before you. That is, if reasonable, ethical, and unbiased facts matter. Rather than attempt to add anything here and now to discussion, I'd like to encourage the council and the lobbying groups to subscribe to the Marin Post. A contributor to the Marin Post, Susan Rushton, has researched forced urbanization and identified the money behind these proposals. And at the state level, these proposals were recently shot down en masse because they attack suburban neighborhoods, and they actually do. This measure excludes the public, the DRB, and benefits only wealthy masquerading as progressives. This measure before you could have been written by Donald Trump, the developer. It's Republican-style deregulation, public engagement suppressed, and a cut-and-paste agenda from the lobby California Association of Realtors. If the council moves this forward, they are using pre-COVID data, a survey that required a knowledge of Spanish to complete, and all positive responses. But most importantly, it abandons a system of public engagement that it paid for and deserves.
You done? Okay, thank you.
Okay, and we will move back over to YouTube. Kate Powers, I'm requesting confirmation that under number 2 density bonus policy, that by aligning with state requirements, there will not be any circumstances under which city density bonuses will be additive to the state density bonuses. And that concludes public comment.
Thank you. So I'm hoping staff I could see if you were writing notes, if you have any answers to the questions that were raised. I think there was some around, I think there was some confusion about DRB and whether it was being eliminated or not. Clarification about the hillside guidelines and the public process were 3 of the ones I heard. You might probably heard additional ones.
Allie, I think you've been working the most on the DRB, so you might be.
Yeah, so I'll respond to the questions regarding DRB, hillside design guidelines, and the public process. Just to clarify, the idea is to, based on City Council's direction at the last meeting, is to find a way to involve public and continue public participation in the design review process. So the DRB itself is not being dissolved completely. We're trying a pilot that would be made up of the current DRB membership. And that pilot would include a licensed architect, a licensed landscape architect. And then what we are looking at, I think something that we discussed or proposed last time was having an alternate as well. So again, the DRB is not being disbanded. We're just looking at finding an alternative makeup for as a pilot, and then coming back to share with your council to see how that's working. Then the other question was related to hillside exceptions. The letter that was received discussed some possible options and changes to the hillside development standards. And our effort was really to try to find a way to align the exceptions process with the other exceptions and variance procedures that exist for the city as a whole. And so we're just trying to align that piece to everything else within the city. And our intent was to keep the hillside design or development standards intact. So we're going to, our recommendation is that we stick to that. There are some in the information that was provided in that, recommended changes that were provided in that letter. Our recommendation is that for now, we're just looking for ways to streamline the review process and aligning the exceptions process with what's already happening throughout the city seems appropriate. I think those were the 3 topics that were related to Design Review Board public participation in Hillside. Ethan, were there any that were related to in lieu that you want to address?
I didn't mark out any for in lieu, but I did flag one density bonus question, whether or not it was additive to the state.
Yes, if you could clarify.
So the answer to that is that we're not adding any additional. We're just aligning our ordinance with the state mandated state density bonus law.
Yes. Paul, did you want to add?
In fact, I was going to mention that, and I'm glad that Ethan picked up on it. Just one other point that was raised regarding geotechnical review. Geotechnical review is looked at on a case-by-case basis based on the conditions of the property, mapping that we have, and we rely on the city engineer to give us guidance on the adequacy of the information that's provided to us to determine if that information is adequate for assessing and determining a development review. So I just wanted to clarify, that's not something that is linked to an exception process. It's part of just standard review of any project, whether it's a hillside area or an area on landfill over bay mud. That's a standard practice that we look at, and it's judged and reviewed on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. So I think that answers the questions we heard from the public. So bringing it back to council, if there are any additional questions or comments, Councilmember Bushy, start with you.
My only comment is to thank Ali for recognizing the important role of the DRB and incorporating them in this process. They will probably bring really good ideas for how we can condense their input and achieve our goal of keeping that in the process, yet making the process move more quickly. So I support the resolution as brought forward and await a motion.
Thank you. Councilmember Gamblin.
Again, thanks to staff, but no further comments.
Okay. Councilmember McCullough.
The same.
Making up for the hour-long conversation we had 2 weeks ago. I also appreciate all the work that staff has done, and it is abbreviated tonight, but we had a lot more information, and this is part of it. I think we started over a year and a half ago having this conversation regarding housing, and we all agree that the conversation started because we need to move the needle. We realized that we might have unintended barriers to our housing, and we wanted to see what those were. If there are things that we wanted to change. That's why we're having this conversation. And we do understand that the 10% number is different than the 20%. And on the face of it, it might look like we're actually having less, but 10% or 20% of zero is still zero. And we're very hopeful by looking at the 10% inclusionary that we'll actually have the units being produced in the way that we want in our community. I am also hoping, and I think it came up through the public, if we can review it again, once we start moving through the process and you bring back ordinance, we start making this official, but to review it again in a year, just so we can see. And I think Bill Carney had talked about the metric piece. I think we will all want to see that, like, okay, this is a big policy change. Is it doing the things we want to do? So we will want to be sure to go back and do that. So with unless there are no other comments, now would be an appropriate time for a motion.
Yeah, I move that we accept the report and direct staff to proceed as indicated in the report, subject to the comments we received, or rather subject to the additional guidance we received. I think it was from Ali to engage more closely with DRB going forward.
Thank you.
Second?
Okay. Been moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Councilmember McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Colin.
Aye. That motion carries 4-0. The report is accepted. Thank you. We are moving on to the next item on our agenda, which is an informational report on the status of homelessness in San Rafael. This will probably be an hour long. No, just kidding. No, we really appreciate Andrew joining us this evening. So I will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Kate. Our Mayor Pro Tem Colin. It's great to see everyone tonight. Good to see you, council members. Let me pull up here. I've got a presentation. I have tried as best I can to keep this to under 10 minutes. So what I wanted to do was first, just a quick acknowledgement. As I think we all know, and as I said in my initial salutation, we have such close partnerships now, I think, within the city, within different departments across the county, our service providers, that this really is a team effort. And I think the relationships we've built over the past 5 years in particular have gone a long way to really driving a lot of the change that I'm going to be talking about tonight. I also want to mention, especially when we get to the Q&A section, that I'm joined tonight by colleagues from the city attorney's office, community development, the police department, and the fire department, because again, this is a citywide issue and we have a large team that's working on this. So if there are any specific questions that arise, I just wanted to flag that as a resource. So just to set the stage, and some of this I know the council's familiar with, but just for the public's sake, to make sure everyone knows kind of what has been done over the past few years. From 2017 to 2019, according to the annual point in time counts, 80% of counties in California saw increases in homelessness over that time. And Marin and San Rafael specifically was an exception to that. We saw actually a 30% reduction in unsheltered homelessness from 2017 to 2019. So I wanted to just briefly describe at a high level, strategic level, what's changed. And I think the core insight really emerged back in 2015 and 2016, which was this idea that I think until that point, we hadn't really been segmenting the homeless community very well. I think we just treated everyone as just sort of everyone's homeless and everyone needs the same intervention. But the reality was that, based on public feedback at that time and public comments and concerns, and what we were hearing from our service providers, we came to realize that a small minority of the overall homeless community, people experiencing chronic homelessness, were actually generating the vast majority of our community concerns with the homelessness issue. And the way that manifested was, one was just costs. So there were studies back at that time that were showing that people experiencing chronic homelessness were costing local government in terms of the criminal justice system, the healthcare system, over $60,000 per year per person. We've also seen in San Rafael that the chronically homeless were generating the vast majority of our community concerns about homelessness. About 70% of people experiencing homelessness in San Rafael receive zero 911 calls, criminal justice interventions, anything like that. It really is a very small minority of folks who are generating the vast majority of concerns. And then lastly, and I think this is really kind of, for me, the ethical glue to all of this, is that in terms of just vulnerability, people experiencing chronic homelessness have been found to pass away from preventable, treatable chronic illnesses 20 to 25 years earlier than their house peers. And again, that's simply just being on the street and not being able to access care. So as I mentioned, part of the challenge, I think, historically in Marin, and I think this is still a challenge in a lot of other communities, is that the focus is not on chronic homelessness. It's on other groups of people experiencing homelessness, often folks who are more likely to actually self-resolve or resolve their homelessness with very minimal resources. And so when we landed on this insight, we went on a series of field trips up to the North Bay, down to the peninsula, the East Bay. You'll recognize some of your peers among these pictures from our various field trips. And over the course of this, as we were beginning to understand what other communities were doing, we also began to better understand what we were doing. And the details of this map aren't important, but you can see in the middle, that's homelessness, and the outside is housing. And there was a maze of trying to get from homelessness to housing. And so Howard Schwartz, who some of you know, who's on the right there in the picture, has a PhD, very smart guy. If he can't navigate this system, why would we expect someone experiencing chronic homelessness to do any better? And so with what we were learning and what we were observing, we came to find that there was this very ultimately simple feedback loop that was driving chronic homelessness in our community. We had people that were inherently difficult to serve because of issues like mental illness or substance abuse or developmental challenges, often many of these things at once. They would fail out of our programs. They would become more distrustful of the system. They wouldn't seek help and they would get worse. And in some cases, and unfortunately, there's still a handful of people who have been homeless in Marin County for 30, even 40 years. And some of those folks we've housed, and some of those folks we're still working to house. And part of the way that we've done that is really this other key insight, which is that instead of having just another mental health program or another healthcare program or whatever it might be, we really had to narrow in very specifically to the individual needs of the people that were on the street experiencing homelessness. So we pulled together all of our service providers, the city, the county, local nonprofits. We pulled in executives, we pulled in frontline staff, and we really started working off, in the beginning, it was a dozen people, the most high needs, visible, high contact individuals. And we said, if we can't house these 12 people, then seriously, what are we doing? So we met every other week for 18 months. We began to shift away from the maze of managing homelessness to more of really, I think, this very great infographic here of ending homelessness through housing first, where you're taking folks directly from the street, putting them into housing with support services. And the data has shown that that's much more effective than just waiting for people to go jump through the hoops of getting in shelter, getting sober. It's much easier to house someone and then work on those issues. And amazingly enough, it worked. And so over those first 18 months after we launched the homeless outreach team, not only was it named a statewide best practice by the League of California Cities, but we housed 23 of the most vulnerable people in San Rafael through this housing first model. And so fast forward to 2017, we kept learning, we kept trying to improve, and we stumbled upon something called Built for Zero. And Built for Zero is a national movement of now over 80 communities working to end chronic and veteran homelessness. And with Built for Zero, essentially what they're doing is they're helping communities take that by name list concept that we'd created with the HOT team and make it a county-wide, community-wide strategy. And so that's what we did. In October of 2017, almost exactly 3 years ago, we made this strategy county-wide. And so fast forward to 2019, we had seen a 28% reduction in chronic homelessness. We had a 7% overall decrease in homelessness countywide, but a 28% reduction in this very high needs chronic homelessness. 95% of those people were still housed. And for San Rafael specifically, looking at people that have been homeless in San Rafael before and after the housing intervention, we saw an 86% reduction in police involvement and a 54% reduction in EMS transports. So really hitting at all of the, I think, original hypotheses we had about these being folks that had high criminal justice involvement, high healthcare utilization, and really that this was a strategy that would work for them. So that's very, again, briefly, the past 4 or 5 years. And so now moving into 2020, obviously the big concern is COVID. And of course, we've had many major issues that have come up this year, but starting with COVID, our major goal, and I had the honor of spending part of this year actually co-leading the county's response to homelessness through the Emergency Operations Center at the county, was really this. I think that there were a lot of fears in the beginning of a pretty massive outbreak among the homeless community. And so a lot of those efforts were trying to mitigate anything like that. And so at the height of some of the pandemic activity over the summer, we had increased emergency shelter by as much as 60%. The county right now still has an eviction moratorium in place for anyone affected by COVID. We were able to provide emergency rental assistance to approximately 1,000 households. And even then, the demand for that program was double, if not more, what we were able to provide. You've probably seen across from City Hall, over at the library, we have now bathrooms and hygiene services for people in the homeless community. That's been replicated across the entire county. It's not just downtown San Rafael. We've been providing, through the county in particular, at the height of the pandemic, outreach to encampments. There are significant encampment activities beyond San Rafael. I think a lot of people think it's just in San Rafael, but there's been a lot of issues up in Novato. There are issues in Central Marin as well. And then even West Marin, we had to evacuate people during the fires. So this is really a countywide issue. And I think the real key, though, going back to the first part of the presentation, is that we have really tried to not lose focus of chronic homelessness being our core strategy. if anything, COVID reveals that, again, people that are chronically homeless, that are older and have these health issues, they're more susceptible and more vulnerable to the disease. And so we've been really mindful of trying to target those folks for shelter and housing and other interventions. And in fact, last month was our best month of housing placements since we started coordinated entry 3 years ago. We housed, it was either 20 or 21 individuals in just 1 month. And a big part of that was actually that Victory Village, which is a housing, affordable housing project in Fairfax, is finally online. And we had negotiated to carve out some units for people that are coming through coordinated entry. So again, a lot of people I think sometimes think that we're just housing people in San Rafael, but we're actually housing people all over the entire community. So I thought that was a really great way to conclude year 2 and move into year 3. On the housing front, in terms of San Rafael, what we're doing, as I think the council knows and the public might know, but Homeward Bound is our major shelter provider in Marin County. And in San Rafael, they have their kind of signature gateway into the shelter system program, which is the Mill Street Center. The plan has been to actually rebuild Mill Street so that it includes the shelter, as well as to go up a couple more levels to add 32 units of permanent supportive housing. Homeward Bound is basically ready to go on this project. They've been working on it for a few years. And again, this would be really significant in terms of being able to provide even more intensive on-site services for really high needs people. I did want to let the council know 2 things. One of which is that Homeward Bound, obviously, while they're rebuilding, they cannot be offering shelter at that site. So within the past few weeks, they've finalized their candidate site for relocating on a temporary basis, the Mill Street Shelter. And so the site that they've worked out is currently a commercial property located at 3301 Kerner Boulevard. It's catty corner to the Health and Wellness Campus, next to transit. And so that's a site that they're currently looking at potentially using for the temporary Mill Street Shelter. On that front next week, and Allie's on the call from Community Development, but we do have a Planning Commission hearing for that project. So that is going through the public review process through the Planning Commission, but I wanted to make sure you're aware. The second piece related to this is that folks might have heard of this program called Project Room Key, which was a state program that started when COVID started. And it was an effort to, again, house people in motels or other kind of non-traditional sites for housing to keep them safe during COVID. And so the follow-up program to Project Room Key is something called Project Home Key, which provided $600 million across the entire state for communities to move from sheltering to actually creating permanent housing for folks in the homeless community to really build on this momentum that we're currently experiencing. And so there was a team that included the city of San Rafael, the county of Marin, Eden Housing, Homeward Bound, Marin Community Foundation that was working on Marin County's application for Project Home Key. And 3301 Kerner was also submitted as a candidate for that site. That was one of 3 sites. It was the only site in San Rafael, one of 3 sites countywide. For better or worse, that project has met the required point threshold that the state was looking for. However, the demand for this program was pretty significant. In fact, the Bay Area received a geographic funding set aside of $100 million, and the demand was almost 100 to 200% greater than what the available funding was. So this project is currently it's past the points threshold, so it could potentially qualify, but it's on the wait list for funding from Project Home Key. So I also wanted to make sure the council is aware of that as well. So despite a lot of, I think, really good work to try to shelter people over the past few years, and particularly the past few months, in Marin and across the state, again, only about 30 to now maybe 40% of people experiencing homelessness actually have access to nightly shelter. So there's still a significant number of people that are unhoused on the street. And so I just wanted to conclude, and then we can move into more questions and other comments, but really just an update on our strategy around encampments in San Rafael. And we've been moving, I think, more and more every year towards a strategy of really trying to prohibit any and all encampment activity in the open space. But now this fire season in particular, we really have moved towards really trying to enforce a complete prohibition of encampment activity in the open space. This has resulted in, of course, and just to put this in perspective, Sergeant Carl Huber's on the call can speak to this as well. But what we've observed, I think historically, is that we're really only dealing with maybe 24 or more people. So a relatively small group in the grand scheme of things, who are the ones who are sort of chronically staying in the open space. And so it's not that many people, but obviously, one encampment with one person in the open space can create a huge hazard. And so we've been working really hard to make sure people are not in the open space. But the result is that we have seen some additional encampment activity in other parts of the city, especially areas maybe adjacent to the open space in residential areas, as well as maybe near freeway on and off ramps, or even in the downtown. So that's just something that, as we've been dealing with, I think, the very real wildfire danger, and I believe Chief White's on the call as well, and he can speak to this too, but this is really a red line that we're trying to, enforce to make sure that the community stays safe. So it's far from ideal. And just to, acknowledge on that note, I think despite all the great work, quantifiably that we've done over the past few years, I definitely understand completely the community's concern of seeing even one person camping in their neighborhood. I understand that, and it's not ideal, and that's something that we're working to address. So on that note, I'll stop here and see if there are any questions from the council.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, stop the screen share. So are there any questions from council members? Councilmember Gamblin, looks like you unmuted.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew, thanks for the very detailed report, and congratulations on the successes over the past 5 years, and the continued successes in light of the challenges that COVID has placed upon you. One of the questions that I wanted to ask in addressing the encampments and what the responsibility of the city is, I know that we received from community members about encampments that are not on San Rafael city property. Although they're within the city limits of San Rafael, they're not on our property, and there are certain limitations that we can do to even address those encampments. And maybe perhaps you can speak to what those are, for example, on state property, because I know that's kind of what the state has said during COVID on what to do with these encampments.
Yes, it's a great question. Thank you for bringing it up. So we've learned, and this is a recent development within the past few weeks, that and just to even take a step back to let the public know, the guidance from a public health perspective over the past few months from CDC has been to not clear any encampments whatsoever, because the concern is that if you clear an encampment, you potentially shift people into new parts of the city, and that could potentially exacerbate transmission of COVID. So that's been the public health recommendation all along. We have felt that the public safety danger in the open space is even greater than the COVID concern, and so that's why we've been continuing to move forward with enforcing in the open space. Where we've recently run into a bit of a challenge, I would say, is that as you alluded to, the state of California, by way of Caltrans, which is the major entity that's enforcing on public property. So again, think on and off ramps is a good example of public property. They are fully embracing the CDC guidelines to follow this harm reduction model. And so we have received direction that unless there is an imminent safety danger, such as people actually being in the right of way. I think an example that was recently reported was there was an encampment in San Jose that was within about 5 feet of a roadway where traffic was moving at 45 miles an hour. So like really immediate danger. The state is wanting communities to really not move forward with it, addressing those encampments. And so we have other tools in terms of outreach and trying to work with people to get them into shelter or other options. But that has created a bit of a challenge for sure. So I think that's one thing. And I'll stop there on that one.
Thank you. Additional questions? I have one. Andrew, could you speak to the Martin versus Boise case? I mean, you were so comprehensive, really going all the way back to 2013 up to here, but that has actually impacted the tools that the city had. If you could speak to that.
Sure. And I might actually for that turn it over to one of my team members. I think Nira is on the call, so I might defer to Nira, who's definitely our expert on this.
Okay, welcome, Nira.
Thank you for having me. Nira Doherty with the City Attorney's Office. Andrew actually does know the Martin v. Boise case very well, but I'll jump in and give a brief overview of the case that is pretty well known now, and at times I think is thought of in a bit of a broader light than the opinion actually provided. So the Martin v. Boise case was a case that took nearly 2 decades to decide and arose out of a prohibition in Boise that altogether banned sleeping in public places. And what the court, the Ninth Circuit held, and the Supreme Court recently denied cert, and so that Ninth Circuit opinion has been upheld as good law. What the Ninth Circuit said is that people experiencing homelessness can't be punished for sleeping outside on public property in the absence of adequate alternatives. And so what the court was saying in Martin v. Boise is that where a city does not have adequate housing, there cannot be a altogether ban on sleeping in all public places. There needs to be some means of an alternative for people experiencing homelessness. And that alternative can either be in the form of housing or accommodations for people experiencing homelessness, or the city has to permit, to a certain extent, sleeping in certain public places. The decision did not upend and deny a city the opportunity to prohibit sleeping in certain public places. And in San Rafael, that has taken the form of a prohibition on sleeping in streets and sidewalks, and as Andrew was describing, in large part in open space. And those actions of the city are indeed consistent with Martin v. Boise, which made clear that cities can determine certain public places that are not appropriate and illegal for sleeping.
Thank you. That was a great synopsis, because I know there was a lot to that and it had far-reaching implications. So thank you for bringing it back to how it affects San Rafael. So unless there are any other questions from my fellow council members, we'll open it up to public comment. The city clerk will describe how people can participate.
Thank you. If you are participating by telephone and you wish to provide public comments, please press *9. You will be notified that it is your turn to speak, and I'm inviting you to do so. Please press *6 when you hear that notification to unmute yourself. And if you're participating on YouTube, please start submitting your comments now. And please remember to write public comments and introduce yourself in advance. We have no callers on the line. And we do have a couple YouTube comments. Name withheld. I live against open space in the Dominican area. I am concerned about homeless people starting fires. There are a lot of dry and live trees around. What is the city doing to keep us safe? This is from Kate Powers. I very much appreciate Andrew's work and the city's funding of homelessness, planning and outreach ongoing, but especially now during the challenges of the pandemic. And I'm going to give about 15 more seconds to allow for other comments to come in. And that concludes public comments.
Okay, thank you. So not a lot of questions or a request for additional information, but there was the one about fire and how the city is handling that. So I don't know, Andrew, you want to tackle that, or I see that Chief White is on the call. However, oh, there he is.
Yeah, I think maybe if Chief White wants to weigh in, as well as Sergeant Huber, they're definitely our front line. So that would be fantastic.
Yeah, no, that would be great, because we have received, the council's received quite a few emails outlining this concern. Chief White.
Good evening, Mayor and council members and members of the public. This is Darren White, and I'd just like to share just a brief overview of some of the things we've been doing to address our concerns regarding homeless encampments and or the risk that they pose. Unfortunately, as you just heard, there are some parameters on which we cannot operate based on Martin versus Boise. But that being said, we're working and collaborating with others, trying to ensure that they recognize and understand the dangers that impact our community, whether it be Caltrans, whether it be PG&E, and other private property owners. And so I'm happy to state that we've had the benefit of our NCCC crews from AmeriCorps. They're going to be returning here in about 6 weeks. We're going to actually have 2 crews, one from St. Louis, one from Sacramento. They'll be back right around the same time at the end of October. And that effort will involve us continuing to work to clear in open space areas, trying to ensure that we clear fire road access and those individuals who've actually identified or requested the assistance via the MWPA measure funds that we have available to assist homeowners who may need a little bit of fiscal assistance in addressing their properties. And so I think that's a very huge thing. I've got to say we continue to do our inspection programs with the defensible space temporary seasonal inspectors. They're out. They've gotten well over 2,500 inspections conducted to date. So that's given us a good idea of what our hazards are and how we can work with the property owners to abate those hazards. We expect that work to continue pretty much towards the end of the year. In addition to that, we also have our engine and truck company personnel out. They're actually doing site or windshield surveys at various locations within their districts. And the benefit of that is that they're kind of a force multiplier to our defensible space inspectors this year by going out and taking a look at 3 sides of the property and 4 when possible, and identifying those hazards and areas of concern that can inform back to the D-Space and vegetation management inspectors about the actual work or problems that they see in the areas that can guide and direct their work and the efforts moving forward, especially as we start to receive the availability of additional MWPA Measure C funds to work on future projects. So there's a lot going on right now. That's probably a good quick synopsis. We've goat grazed hundreds of acres. We've had a lot of work in that regard as well that took place this year. And I'm just really excited to see what all we're going to be able to do as we move forward into the next year and the next season, having a well-informed database of what our 9,000 or so parcels look like and where the problem areas are, and how we can really work on collaboratively with the homeowners, with Caltrans, with PG and our other stakeholders to further reduce our risk when it comes to wildfire. It's not going to be easy, but we're up to the task, and we're working hard right now to get things moving and as quickly as we possibly can.
Thank you, Chief White. And it's nice to know what's going on from the city and the city open space, but also having the reminder as homeowners what all of our personal responsibility is as well. So thank you for that. Absolutely. Sergeant Huber, did you want to add on?
Yes, thank you, Honorable Vice Mayor and members of council, for letting me weigh in on this issue. To piggyback on what Chief White had to say regarding some of the prevention measures, his team has done some very good work. It's actually helped us out quite a bit in the open space, especially with the elimination of a lot of the underbrush on San Rafael Hill and other open space areas. From the police department's efforts, we have I actually supervise the Special Operations Unit, which is the Footbeat team and the Open Space Rangers. With the wildfire mitigation funds, we were able to employ a full-time ranger this year for the first time to assist a part-time ranger. They work as a team, and they patrol the open space, looking for encampments that are often nestled in the underbrush up on the hills in the open space. We give a certain amount of notice to the occupants of those campsites for them to remove their campsites, but also seize any ignition devices or fuel that we find in the campsites immediately. At which time we will remove the campsites from the open space, often with partnership with the Department of Public Works. To date, we have been able to remove over 150 campsites in open space with approximately 60,000 pounds of refuse and debris located within those campsites.
Wow. Thank you. We appreciate all that you're doing. Andrew, is there anything you wanted to add on?
Yeah, no, I mean, extreme gratitude for the team. I think there's a lot of great efforts going on. The only thing I would add is just, again, I think in describing the broader strategy around chronic homelessness, I often neglect, which is not an insignificant activity that the city also achieved, is that over the past few years, we have worked with our local service providers, and in particular the Ritter Center, to make modifications to some of the services that are offered in downtown. So a few years ago, there used to be essentially a free mail service in downtown. That no longer exists. There used to be showers offered in downtown. That no longer is happening. That service is now being operated by the streets team countywide in Novato, Sausalito, Fairfax. And so I think it's important for the community to know that the folks that we're interacting with now that are in these encampments, we have a pretty good handle on who they are. And a lot of them are longtime, again, chronically homeless people from Marin County, from San Rafael. And so we're really trying to work with them on with the streets team and other outreach efforts to try to get them connected with services, get them connected to housing. This isn't the same, I guess you could call it maybe the transient homelessness challenge that we were dealing with a few years ago. So I just wanted to add that as well, because that took a lot of work to get there and a lot of partners and other even cities and towns coming to the table and being supportive of those efforts and putting money towards those efforts. So again, I think that's also aided in just changing the overall sort of ecosystem of, services and enforcement in San Rafael.
Right. And I realized as you were speaking that we hadn't talked about Lynn Murphy yet. And she is someone who does a great deal for the city of San Rafael. Maybe you just want to speak to her speak about her, because I know we're the only city in all of Marin County who's fortunate to have a Lynn Murphy and a Blue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Lynn's incredible. Lynn's our mental health outreach liaison. She is not a sworn officer, but she is part of Sergeant Hubert's team. And so Lynn's been with the city for, I think, 7 years or so, maybe more. And yeah, she's just been an incredible asset for doing outreach in downtown to our really hard to reach folks, especially our mentally ill population, connecting them with services, connecting them with housing. I think she's really a linchpin to connecting our priority people to the providers, making sure that those individuals are top of radar for our providers. And again, I think, the city has been very generous in both in terms of Lynn's role and my role and being able to even advise other jurisdictions so that, again, San Rafael is not the only community in Marin County that has an issue with folks experiencing homelessness. And so really trying to help other communities build their own internal capacity. I know she's helped advise the Nevada Police Department, for example, to help them develop not quite the same role as you said, but similar capacities to really provide more outreach services to people that need it. So yeah, could not do it without Lynn for sure.
And she now has a dog, Blue, who I guess has been quite winning hearts all over the community. And one thing we've actually talked a lot about is how do the police respond to folks that are in mental health crisis. And Lynn is part of the arsenal that we have here in the city of San Rafael. And we've been on the cutting edge of having her out there and connecting with people. So let me turn it over to my council members. Are there any other comments or questions? Yes, Councilmember McCullough.
Yeah, Andrew, you've raised the issue, so I'm curious, and perhaps others are as well, that several years ago, our focus, as a council and as a community, was to reduce the concentration of homeless in and around San Rafael generally, but in and around our downtown in order to reduce the disproportionate impacts that they were having on our downtown merchants and quality of life. And with the dispersal of services, you mentioned, for example, showers and mail, do we have data that shows that apart from the data you provided showing a modest reduction in homelessness fairly recently, do we have data that shows the movement of the existing homeless population out of our downtown or even out of San Rafael and where they currently reside in the county?
That's a good question. You could look at the point in time counts, which are done every odd year at the end of January. So we have an upcoming count, and that breaks down by jurisdiction how many people were counted in a given city or town or even unincorporated area. So I don't have that handy to look at like the trend, but you could look at that data over time to see how it's shifted. I will say that I believe at the moment, from at least the 2019 count, only 28% of the people experiencing homelessness in Marin County were actually in San Rafael. So I think that speaks to the fact that there's a lot of homelessness that's not that's beyond San Rafael. But I think it can sometimes manifest in different ways, and so people might not see it in the same way. So for example, down in southern Marin, there's about 100 people living on the water on Richardson's Bay who are in boats that, again, if you were driving down 101 and looked out, they'd seem fine, but most of them could sink at any moment. Those people are considered homeless in terms of the point in time count. There are a lot of people in West Marin, and in particular in Nevada, that are sleeping in cars or vehicles. And so that's another way that it manifests elsewhere. So what I think that also shows is that, and this was something that was happening, was a lot of people might have been staying somewhere else. So they might have been counted in that community, early in the morning when the count was done. But to your point, they were then coming to San Rafael during the day for those services. And so I don't necessarily have the data on how that's changed objectively. But I can say, until very recently, I think this is just a response to COVID and more people being downtown. I have not at least received a complaint about, some of our providers downtown in a long time, or if I do, it's kind of few and far between. So I do think that just qualitatively there has been a shift. And so again, our hope with COVID is to not kind of backslide on the progress we've made downtown, and continue to try to really address those high needs people as they show up.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Nick.
Other questions or comments? Could you speak to the mobile showers? Because to Councilmember McCullough's point, that was something that was changed from just San Rafael, but we want to assure people that are watching that showers are still available for folks that aren't housed.
Yeah, showers are definitely still happening. And I should say with mail, I didn't mean to convey that the mail service is completely gone. The mail has shifted to a P.O. box program at the main post office on Bellum. So it's not that service is not available to people. For the showers, it was the exact same thing. In fact, that was the original agreement with the Ritter Center, was that if we could provide an alternative that was comparable to what they were providing, then they would cease that service in downtown. And so it took maybe, I think, about a year of working on the mobile shower program, which again was great. We were working with faith-based groups in Novato and funders in Mill Valley and all over. But really the streets team, downtown streets team, ran with that. And I guess it was the beginning of 2019, they launched Marin Mobile Care, mobile showers. And so those are showers that are offered in East San Rafael near the Health and Wellness Campus, where the proposed Mill Street temporary location would be. They're also operating in Novato, down near the water in Dunphy Park and Sausalito to help the anchor out community, in Fairfax. And again, during the height of the pandemic, they were actually operating in downtown as well at the San Rafael Community Center on B Street. So that team has been fantastic. And I think the way that, and I briefly said this, but and you've been a key part of this, Vice Mayor Colin, but is working with all of the jurisdictions in Marin County to fund the Community Homeless Fund, which is essentially an equitable contribution across all jurisdictions to support, again, a countywide service or benefit. That money used to go to the REST program, which used to be our winter emergency shelter program operated by the faith-based communities. When that ended and the support went to supporting Mill Street, we shifted that funding to the mobile shower program. So not only is it a program that's serving the many communities in Marin, it's actually funded by all communities in Marin. And we really see it as a gateway into that broader coordinated entry system. So it's how we're getting people in these other areas also in the queue for housing.
Thank you. So unless there are any other comments, kudos, compliments to Andrew and all the folks that he works with, then I would entertain a motion to accept the report.
I move we accept the report.
And second, with kudos, Andrew and everybody who helped him.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Councilmember McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Colin.
Aye. That matter carries 4-0. Thank you, Andrew, and we really appreciate you coming tonight and talking to us and to the community and giving us an update. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much.
So the next item on our agenda, is there any council member reports or requests for future agenda items? Okay, we've all been inside Zooming all over the place. I see nothing on the San Rafael successor agency. So we're going to adjourn. Everybody wear your masks and stay safe out there.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.